The Montana dawn broke cold and merciless over Fort Harrison, painting the training grounds in shades of rust and gold. Staff Sergeant James Mitchell stood at attention in the cramped office of Colonel Robert Graves, his jaw tight, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside the window, the artillery unit was assembling for morning drills, their voices carrying through the thin walls. James had been in the Army for 12 years. 12 years of discipline, sacrifice, and innovation. But today, none of that seemed to matter. Colonel Graves sat behind his desk, his fingers steepled, his expression carved from stone. The man was old guard, a veteran of Desert Storm, someone who believed in tradition above all else. Behind him hung framed photographs of artillery battalions from decades past, men standing beside howitzers like proud fathers. "You are done with this rope nonsense, Mitchell. Do you understand me?" James felt the words like a punch to the gut. His rope grid method, the system he had spent 3 years perfecting, was being dismissed. Again. "Sir, with all due respect, the method works. Cuts targeting time by 40% and increases accuracy by—" "I do not care about your numbers, Sergeant." The colonel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We have protocols. We have systems that have kept this country safe for generations. You think you are smarter than every artillery officer who came before you?" James said nothing. He had learned long ago that arguing with men like Graves was pointless. The colonel did not want innovation. He wanted obedience. "Your little rope trick is confusing my gunners. It is slowing down the unit. So here is what is going to happen. You will stop teaching it. You will stop using it. And if I hear one more word about it, you will find yourself reassigned to a desk in the middle of nowhere. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Graves waved a hand dismissively. "Get out of my office." James saluted, turned on his heel, and walked out into the cold morning air. His chest felt tight, his mind racing. The rope grid method was not just some gimmick. It was a breakthrough. Traditional artillery targeting required complex calculations, radio coordination, and time. Precious time that could mean the difference between life and death in combat. His method used a simple rope grid system that allowed gunners to visualize trajectories instantly, adjusting for wind, distance, and elevation with minimal math. But the Army did not care. Or at least, Graves did not care. "Hey, Sarge." James turned to see Private Danny Torres jogging toward him, his breath misting in the cold air. Danny was one of the younger guys, eager and sharp. He had been one of the first to embrace the rope method. "I heard what happened in there." Danny glanced back at the command building, his expression sympathetic. "That is messed up, man. Your system is genius." James forced a smile. "It is what it is, Torres. Orders are orders. But it works. We have seen it work." Danny lowered his voice. "Some of us are still using it in practice. Off the record." James shook his head. "Do not risk it. If Graves catches you, he will have your stripes. Just stick to the old way." Danny looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded instead. "Whatever you say, Sarge." As Danny walked away, James stood alone on the edge of the training field, watching the artillery crews set up their guns. The M777 howitzers gleamed in the early light, beautiful and deadly. He loved those machines. He loved the precision, the power, the responsibility that came with being a gunner. But he hated the stubbornness, the refusal to adapt, the blind loyalty to outdated systems just because that was how it had always been done. James pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, the pages filled with diagrams and calculations. The rope grid method was simple in concept. You laid out a rope grid on the ground, marked at precise intervals. The gunners could then use the grid as a visual reference, adjusting their aim based on the position of the target relative to the markers. It eliminated the need for constant radio chatter and reduced human error. He had tested it in simulations. He had taught it to a handful of willing gunners. Every single trial had shown dramatic improvements. And now it was banned. James closed the notebook and slipped it back into his pocket. The sun was climbing higher now, burning away the frost on the grass. In a few hours, the unit would be running live fire exercises. Traditional exercises. Slow, clunky, inefficient exercises. He turned and started walking toward the barracks, his boots crunching on the gravel. Maybe Graves was right. Maybe he was just a sergeant with delusions of grandeur. Maybe innovation had no place in an institution built on tradition. But deep down, James knew the truth. One day, someone would need his method. One day, lives would depend on it. He just hoped that day would not come too late. 3 weeks passed like a slow bleed. James went through the motions, running drills the old way, biting his tongue every time he saw a targeting mistake that his method could have prevented. The other sergeants started avoiding him. Word had spread that he was on thin ice with Graves, and nobody wanted to be associated with a troublemaker. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon during a joint training exercise with the Air Force. The scenario was straightforward. Identify and eliminate simulated enemy armor positions using coordinates provided by aerial reconnaissance. 6 targets scattered across the valley, timed exercise, standard protocol. James stood with his crew at gun position 3, watching as the Fire Direction Center relayed coordinates over the radio. The process was agonizingly slow. Calculate trajectory, adjust for wind, confirm elevation, wait for clearance. By the time the first round was fired, 8 minutes had elapsed. In combat, those targets would have already repositioned. In combat, his men would be sitting ducks. Mitchell, your gun is lagging behind. Colonel Graves' voice crackled over the command radio, sharp and accusatory. What is the holdup? Following standard protocol, sir. James kept his voice neutral, but his jaw was clenched so tight it ached. Well, follow it faster. The exercise dragged on. 2 of the 6 targets were missed entirely due to calculation errors. Another took 3 attempts to hit because the wind data was outdated by the time it reached the gunners. The Air Force observers stood off to the side, clipboards in hand, their expressions carefully blank. James knew what they were thinking. He would be thinking the same thing. After the debrief, Major Lisa Chun from the Air Force pulled him aside near the equipment shed. She was a sharp woman, mid-30s, with the kind of focused intensity that came from flying combat missions over hostile territory. I heard about your rope method. Her voice was quiet, almost conspiratorial. James stiffened. That is not something I am authorized to discuss, ma'am. She glanced around, making sure they were alone. I also heard it works, that it could have cut today's response time in half. Could have. James met her eyes. But the colonel does not agree. The colonel is an idiot. Chun said it flatly, without malice, just stating a fact. I have seen men die because artillery support arrived 30 seconds too late. 30 seconds, Sergeant. Your method could save those 30 seconds. James felt something crack inside him. All the frustration and anger from the past weeks suddenly pressing against his ribs. Then what am I supposed to do? Disobey orders? Get court-martialed for trying to save lives? Chun was silent for a long moment, studying him. Then she pulled out a business card and pressed it into his hand. If you ever decide you are tired of banging your head against a brick wall, call me. We have people who appreciate innovation. She walked away before he could respond, leaving James standing alone with the card in his hand, the weight of an impossible choice settling onto his shoulders. The call came at 0400 hours on a Saturday morning. James was yanked from sleep by his phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. He grabbed it, his heart already pounding with that pre-dawn adrenaline that every soldier knows. Mitchell, get to the command center. Now. It was Lieutenant Ramirez, his voice tight with urgency. We have a situation. James was dressed and out the door in 4 minutes. The base was alive with activity. Vehicles racing through the darkness, floodlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. Something big was happening. The command center was chaos. Officers huddled around monitors, radios crackling with urgent transmissions. Colonel Graves stood at the center of it all, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. What is going on? James asked Ramirez. Border incursion. Ramirez kept his voice low. Mexican cartel convoy crossed into Arizona 2 hours ago. Heavily armed. They hit a border patrol station, killed 2 agents, and are now holed up in an abandoned mining facility outside Nogales. FBI and ATF are on site, but the suspects have anti-aircraft capabilities and hostages. They are requesting artillery support to disable the vehicles before they can escape back across the border. James felt his blood run cold. Live combat. Actual combat on American soil. Graves turned to address the room, his voice booming. We have 9 vehicles to neutralize. Armored SUVs and transport trucks. They are positioned in a tight cluster with minimal cover. Time is critical. They have a window to run at first light, which gives us approximately 90 minutes. Standard targeting protocols. Fire Direction Center will coordinate. James felt his stomach drop. Standard protocols. That meant the slow, methodical process. Calculate, confirm, adjust, fire. With 9 targets and the pressure of a live situation, mistakes were inevitable. He caught Major Chun near the back of the room. She must have been brought in as an Air Force liaison. Their eyes met, and he saw the same thought reflected in her gaze. This was exactly the scenario where the rope grid method would shine. Graves began assigning gun positions. James was given Gun 4, responsible for targets 7 through 9. As the briefing continued, he felt the weight of that banned notebook in his locker, pages filled with a method that could cut their response time in half. The room began to empty as crews rushed to their positions. James stood frozen for a moment, torn between duty and conviction. If you are hoping he makes the right call here, do me a favor. Major Chun appeared beside him, her voice barely a whisper. Subscribe to Hope, because what happens in the next hour is going to change everything. James looked at her, then at the coordinates being transmitted to his tablet. 9 vehicles, hostages, minutes to act. He made his decision. James sprinted to the barracks, his boots hammering against the pavement. He burst into his room, yanked open his locker, and grabbed the notebook. His hands were shaking as he stuffed it into his jacket. This was it. Career suicide or vindication. There was no middle ground. At gun position 4, his crew was already setting up the M777. Danny Torres looked up as James arrived, breathless. Sarge, we got the coordinates. Standard firing procedure, right? James pulled out the notebook, then reached into the equipment truck and grabbed a coil of rope. No, we are doing this my way. Danny's eyes went wide. But Graves said, Graves is not here. James cut him off, his voice hard. I am telling you, if we do this the standard way, people are going to die. Maybe hostages. Maybe our own guys on the ground. I am not letting that happen. He saw the fear and doubt in Danny's face, but also something else. Trust. The crew gathered around as James quickly laid out the rope grid on the ground, marking intervals with stakes. He explained the system in rapid-fire bursts, his years of practice making the instructions flow smoothly. Position references, trajectory visualization, wind compensation using the grid markers. We can hit all 3 targets in under 6 minutes. James locked eyes with each crew member. Standard way takes 18. You decide. Private Martinez spoke up, her voice steady. Let us do it. The next 40 minutes were the most intense of James's life. While the other gun positions labored through their calculations, his crew moved like a surgical team. The rope grid eliminated confusion. Every adjustment was visual, immediate, precise. Danny called out grid positions while James worked the firing calculations. Martinez handled ammunition with mechanical efficiency. Target 7. Adjust 2 marks east. Fire. The howitzer roared. In the command center, confirmation came back within seconds. Direct hit. Vehicle disabled. Target 8. 3 marks north, 1 mark west. Fire. Another direct hit. Target 9. Center grid, maximum elevation. Fire. 3 for 3. James's radio exploded with chatter. Gun position 4 had just eliminated their targets in 5 minutes and 40 seconds. The other positions were still working on their first shots. Mitchell, what the hell are you doing over there? It was Graves, his voice a mixture of confusion and anger. Your firing rate is impossible. Using an improved targeting method, sir. James kept his voice calm. All targets neutralized. 0 misses. Awaiting further orders. There was a long silence on the radio. James could picture Graves in the command center, staring at the confirmation data, unable to argue with results. The other gun positions finished their targets over the next 20 minutes. 2 required multiple attempts. 1 missed entirely and had to recalibrate. By the time the operation concluded, all 9 vehicles were disabled, and ground teams moved in to extract the hostages. 0 casualties, mission success, and everyone knew who had made the difference. The sun was fully up by the time James walked back into the command center. His uniform was stained with gun oil and sweat, his ears still ringing from the howitzer blasts. The room fell silent as he entered. Every eye turned toward him. Colonel Graves stood at the front, his face unreadable. Behind him, a large monitor displayed the mission data. Response times, accuracy rates, comparative analysis between gun positions. The numbers told a story that no amount of tradition could refute. Gun Position 4 had outperformed every other unit by a margin that seemed almost impossible. Mitchell, step forward. James moved through the crowd, his heart pounding. This was it. Court-martial or vindication. He had disobeyed a direct order, and everyone in this room knew it. Graves stared at him for a long moment, and James saw something unexpected in the colonel's eyes. Not anger, not pride, resignation. Explain to me how you achieved those results. James pulled out the notebook, now dog-eared and stained. He walked to the whiteboard and began sketching the rope grid system, his voice steady as he explained the methodology. Visual targeting references, reduced radio dependency, simplified trajectory calculations. As he spoke, he watched the faces in the room. Skepticism gradually shifted to understanding, then to something like awe. Major Chun stood near the back, arms crossed, a slight smile on her face. When James finished, the room was silent. Then a hand went up. Lieutenant Ramirez, why have we not been using this? Because I banned it. Graves' voice cut through the room like a blade. He looked at James, and for the first time the old colonel looked tired. I banned it because it was different. Because it challenged everything I knew about artillery operations. Because I was too proud to admit that a staff sergeant might have found a better way. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Graves turned to address the room. What happened today should not have happened. Not because Sergeant Mitchell's method failed, but because I almost prevented him from using it. He took a breath. 2 border patrol agents are dead. But because of this method, 6 hostages are alive. Ground teams completed their operation without artillery-related casualties. Those are the only numbers that matter. He turned back to James. Your rope grid method is no longer banned. Effective immediately, it becomes part of our standard training protocol. You will train every gun crew on this base. He paused. And you will develop a formal manual for dissemination throughout the artillery corps. James felt the weight lift from his chest, replaced by something lighter. Relief, validation, purpose. Sir, do not thank me, Mitchell. Graves' voice was gruff. Thank the people you saved today. They are the ones who earned this. Major Chun approached as the room began to disperse. Told you, she said quietly. Innovation always wins. Eventually, James looked down at his notebook, at the diagrams and calculations that had nearly ended his career. Now they might save countless lives. 18 months later, James stood in the Pentagon briefing room, the weight of his new uniform still unfamiliar. The silver oak leaf of a major gleamed on his collar, a promotion that had come faster than he ever imagined possible. Around the conference table sat generals, defense contractors, and military advisors from 6 different nations. On the screen behind him, combat footage played. Night vision green showing artillery crews in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria using the rope grid method. The statistics were undeniable. 73% reduction in civilian casualties from artillery fire. 42% faster response times. 91% first-shot accuracy. The Mitchell method, as it had become known, was now standard protocol across all U.S. artillery units and was being adopted by NATO forces worldwide. General Patricia Hawkins, a 3-star with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. Major Mitchell, your innovation has fundamentally changed how we approach fire support operations. The lives saved, both military and civilian, are incalculable. James nodded, but his mind drifted to that cold Montana morning, standing outside Colonel Graves' office, believing his career was over. Graves had retired 6 months ago. Before he left, he had pulled James aside and said something that still echoed. "I was wrong. But you were right. And more importantly, you had the courage to act when it mattered. That is what makes a real soldier." The briefing concluded with applause. As the room emptied, Major Chin approached, now wearing lieutenant colonel insignia. "Not bad for a stubborn sergeant with a rope and a dream," she said with a grin. James laughed. "I had help. Good people who believed when it counted." His phone buzzed. A message from Danny Torres, now a sergeant himself, stationed in South Korea. "Taught the method to our ROK allies today. They loved it. You are a legend over here, sir." James smiled and pocketed the phone. He walked to the window, looking out over the Potomac River, the monuments of Washington gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere out there, artillery crews were training with his system. Gunners were calculating trajectories faster, safer, more accurately. Lives were being saved. Not because he was smarter than everyone else. Not because he was special. But because he refused to let a good idea die just because someone in authority said no. The door opened behind him. General Hawkins stood there holding a folder. "One more thing, Major. We want you to head the new Artillery Innovation Division. Your job will be to find the next Mitchell method. To encourage the next stubborn sergeant who thinks they have a better way." James took the folder, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity. "Yes, ma'am. I would be honored."